And the first time I really interacted with Henry, he went to Vietnam in 1966. At that time, our ambassador to Vietnam was Cabot Lodge. And he had been wisely appointed to be ambassador by Jack Kennedy because Cabot Lodge is a Republican. And already there's a political hazard in appropriating money and sending soldiers, or in those days we used to call them advisors, to Vietnam. So it's good to have a Republican in on the game, so to speak. So Henry went out there at the request of Cabot Lodge to give him his opinion of what's happening. So Henry, being Henry, instead of just going to Saigon and talking to the higher-ups, went all over the place. There are 40 provinces. He goes to many of these separate provinces, spends 6 weeks doing it, gets everybody upset because he's asking all these penetrating questions. He comes back and gives us, at the arms control seminar that night, a talk. And he says that the authority of Saigon doesn't reach beyond Saigon. Each province, the most important man, is the one with the largest private army. The Saigon government is totally inefficient, corrupt, and the same is true in all the provinces. The enemy, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, are much better organized, much more efficient. How naive I was. I have the transcript of the record. Little Mathew gets up and says, if they're very efficient and our side isn't, why don't we change sides? You might have thought Henry would say, you dirty, filthy little communist. That's not what he said. He said, we have nothing to offer them.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Because they just wanted us out. That's what they wanted.
Right.
So that meant I could talk to Henry now. So we used to talk. And now we get flash forward some more, and Nixon is elected. And I'm going back and forth to Washington because of my campaign to get Congress, the press, government advisors interested in the issue of biological weapons.
How old were you at the time? How old were you at the time of this? I'm sure this is after graduate school.
In 66, I would have been 36, I guess.
Okay.
I was born in 1930, 36. So there used to be, I guess there still is, a ramp at American Airlines. I don't know if American is still right here, but it's a ramp that goes down to the gates. And I forget whether I was coming up or I was going down. I just remember it was a steep slope, and Henry's going the other way. And by now we know each other pretty well. I think we'd already traveled together in Europe because he went to Pugwash conferences. You ever heard of Pugwash?
No.
Oh, well, just before the death of Bertrand Russell, he and Einstein issued a manifesto which was calling upon scientists of the world to work for peace. And a very wealthy railway owner in Canada named Cyrus Eaton put up the money for annual meetings of very high-level Soviet scientists and American scientists and British scientists to meet. And he owned some kind of estate at a fishing village in Nova Scotia named Pugwash. And so for some reason, this movement was called Pugwash. And in those days, it still exists, but not in the same way at all. Mm. But in those days, it consisted of the most senior scientists from the Soviet Union and from the United States and Britain. The idea being that they could communicate directly with heads of state, or almost directly. So I didn't know why Henry was going to that. He's not a scientist. The reason, I didn't know it at the time at all. He had established a secret channel of communication with North Vietnam because of a bacteriologist named Herbert Markovich, who was at the Institut Pasteur. Markovitch knew a mathematician named Raymond Aubrac. Raymond Aubrac, Ho Chi Minh, when he was a student in Paris, kind of down and out, lived with the Aubracs, and I think was the chef in some kind of restaurant and earned a little bit of money. But he lived with the Aubracs. So here's a Frenchman who knows Ho Chi Minh, and another Frenchman who knows Aubrac. I don't know how Markovitch initially contacted Henry. I better find that out. It's known. But anyway, Henry would come to the Pugwash conferences, I think, as a cover, because his meetings in Paris not with Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh sent a man named Lee Duc Tho, who was, I guess, like foreign minister of North Vietnam. But they had meeting after meeting, and that's why Henry and Lee Duc Tho both got the Nobel Peace Prize. Lee Duc Tho refused it because the agreement, the ceasefire, didn't last. Anyway, while Henry was going to Pugwash meetings, and I'm going to Pugwash meetings, and I had a car and he didn't, we got to know each other then, too, even better. Mm-hmm. And so now on this ramp, anyway, we sort of bump into each other. Henry is sort of built like a fire plug. I mean, he's thick. I can remember this feeling of bodies smashing. And then he said, Matt, they call me Matt, what should we do about your thing? Because I had been through ACDA and all that stuff, and my thing was chemical. I said, I'll write you a paper. So that was the first paper I wrote for him. It was called The United States and the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which is an international treaty that we suggested and never ratified ourselves, that prohibits the first use of chemical or biological weapons. It allows reprisal. That's not retaliation. Reprisal means no larger an effort than what was done to you. You can't retaliate with a massive response. Reprisal is more limited than retaliation. So it allows reprisal in kind. But we had not ratified it. So I thought that was a reasonable thing to write a paper for the president, because I knew if I went for Henry, it'd go to the president, President Nixon. By the way, when this happened, Nixon hadn't yet taken office, but it was announced that Henry would be his national security advisor. So I began to write a series of papers for Henry and to go down there and talk to him. And I liked him, and I still like him very much. I just sent him a birthday card. His birthday was last Friday. He's 98, I think. I'm 92. And I had lunch with Henry last year. Or was it this year? I'm not sure. The weather was warm. It was spring. I guess it was spring of this year. I'm not sure when it was. Anyway, I used to see him pretty often. And I like him. Mm-hmm. I think he was always trying to contain the war. I think that Nixon was always wanting to expand it. And the people who Nixon was getting advice from was a very hawkish group. But I know Henry is, well, when he came back from that trip to Vietnam in 1966, he was very tired. He had just come in from the airport. And I don't know why it was, but we were having sherry in his office late in the afternoon. And I remember he said to me, he's just back from Vietnam, Matt, now I know how the good Germans must have felt.
Wow.
Every once in a while I ask him what he meant by that. Twice I've asked him. And both times he just fell silent. And after a while it became embarrassing just to sit there in silence. So I resumed the conversation. If we meet again, maybe I'll have the courage to say, Henry, why did you say that? But you can imagine why that endeared him to me.
Right. That's a really powerful
And I
statement.
thought of Henry as the little Dutch boy. I don't know if you know this child's story.
I don't think so.
But there's a hole in the dike, and water is rushing in. It's going to drown everybody. The little Dutch boy puts his thumb in. Because hydraulically, it makes no sense. Mm-mm. You can't get that much water through a hole so small that you could put your thumb in it. Mm-mm. But it saves everybody. So what's he really doing, the little Dutch boy? He's stopping the forces of destruction by just being there and stopping. Is it possible that Henry saw himself? I mean, you got Curtis LeMay still in office, the guy who wants to bomb the hell out of Russia. You've got the most important senator, Richard Russell, chairman of Armed Services, who during the missile crisis with Jack Kennedy, it's all on tape. You can listen to it. It's on YouTube. Jack, we might as well start it now because it's going to happen anyway, meaning the nuclear war. Does Henry see himself as a little Dutch boy? That to have any influence at all with these guys, he's got to be what's called a realist. I don't know. It's complicated. Yeah. It's complicated. I mean, the thing that really bothers you, of course, is Chile and Pinochet. And the fact that there's such things as this wonderful guitarist, Jara. Pinochet's police destroyed his hands before they shot him dead. Anyway,